If you've been climbing for a few months or even a few years and you decide to start training like a pro, you will get injured and you will die. I don't have the body of a professional climber. I didn't start climbing at 5 years old or even 10 years old or even 15 years old. I don't have the benefit of decades of stimulus telling my body to adapt and get stronger. You'd think it makes sense to focus most of your training where you're the weakest, right? Or need the most improvement. When I started climbing 6 years ago, I was something like V1 in finger strength, V3 in upper body strength, maybe V2 in core strength, and like V0 in technique. I'm sure you could come up with a lot more categories, but for our purposes. So you would think, and I did think, that I should A, climb as much as I can to learn as much technique as possible, and B, look to get my fingers stronger since they're sort of the weakest link and often the reason that I don't seem to send a climb. That all sounds great, but the problem is when I did that, I got injured over and over again. A high volume of climbing, training, or both was too much for my fingers, elbows, and shoulders to keep up with, even after a few years of climbing. But probably like you, I still wanted to find a way to progress. So here's my current theory. Climb hard, but climb less. A relatively low quantity of climbing can still keep you progressing as long as it's focused on limit bouldering. Pair this low volume, high intensity climbing with lots of rest and it should keep you from getting a lot of the typical injuries. If you've been psyched on climbing for a few years and somehow haven't been getting injured, you might just be genetically blessed or have hit the lottery there. So I'd probably lean into it and do a bit more training and climbing to see where the line is. You might be leaving some gains out on the table. For most of us, that is not the issue. It's like you're just so psyched to keep improving that you feel the only way to do it is to put on more volume. And it does keep you improving for a while, but then like under the surface somewhere, there can be all these things that are starting to go wrong or wear out or be the potential issues in the future that rear their ugly heads at a certain point. At that point, you already have a lot of work to kind of get your way back to being healthy and ready to train more and keep progressing. It's a catch-22 where it's like volume is going to get you to progress, or so you think at least, but volume will also get you injured, which totally halts your progression. If in doubt, definitely err on the side of doing less volume because volume is the main culprit of injury and it can be really hard to get out of an injury cycle once you get into it. You can ask my friends and former roommates and climbing buddies, but I was in a cycle for several years of getting injured like all the time, always tweaking some finger or messing with climber's elbow or getting a shoulder tweak. My back was hurt, my ankle, my knee. Not all of that was directly from climbing training or overtraining, but almost all of it was. Over the last 18 months or so, I've flipped the script and I've focused on low volume, high intensity, limit bouldering outdoors whenever possible. And my frequency of injury has come way down and I've almost had nothing to worry about the whole 18 months. I'm not gonna lie to you, my progression hasn't been impressive during that time, but it has been sustained. I sent my first V6 right before leaving Vegas back in January of 23. Spent some time here in Colorado building my pyramid back up through the grades. And at this point, I think I've sent 5 or 6 or maybe even 7 V6s, especially if you include the V6 minuses. Haven't sent a V7 yet, but I've got a couple that I'm pretty close on, and I think I might be able to scoop one of them up before I leave Denver here in about a month. Perhaps one of the most important sort of sub-notes of this whole thing is to take a long-term approach. If I was so like focused on having to send the next grade this year or before leaving Colorado or whatever, I'm much more likely to overdo it on a particular climb or overdo it in terms of the number of sessions or underdo it on rest days and just want to get out there more often than I should. But by having goals that are more on the like 5 to 10 year timeline, I don't really have to worry too much about what happens this season, let alone this session. So I find a lot less pressure to push myself to potential injury. And as long as I'm seeing some small progress and small wins on either my technique or strength or both, I'm not going to worry about it seeming slow in the meantime, and I'm going to trust the process and that in the long term, I'm still going to keep progressing and reach my goals. Lifetime goals for me, 8A across all 3 disciplines, 8A in bouldering, which is like V11 in the American grade, 8A in sport climbing, which is like 13B, and also 8A in trad climbing, which is 13B. I figure that as I get older, I focus first on the bouldering, get my max strength up, move to the sport climbing more in sort of my middle age, get my power endurance and my rope head up a bit. And then as I get more and more confident over the years and have all these decades of experience under my belt, I try to transition that same grade and mentality into some sketchy trad 513. Like, it doesn't have to be sketchy, but those are my goals. Hope to achieve them. I think I can if I stick on this plan and keep seeing some small incremental improvements just over year over year over year over decade, and don't really worry about session over session so much. If you've ever struggled with climber's elbow, maybe go watch this video here. I also like snowboard and do some other stuff, so if you only care about climbing and you sub, you might be a little bit disappointed, but thanks for watching, folks.